Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin News Show right here on the World Crypto Network. Sorry guys for being a little bit late here, but we are thrilled and ready to go. I have with me an amazing special guest here, guys. Let me just introduce him real quick. You know, lots of people call him the mad scientist. I personally call him the real life Mr. Robot. But here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Andrew DeSantis. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good with these new all-time highs. I mean, holy crap, Bitcoin hitting over 8,000. I'm just like, whoa. It's definitely taken me a little bit by surprise, but you know, we all knew this was coming, and we were expecting 5-digit Bitcoin, you know, and the hyper Bitcoinization I think is going to be upon us pretty soon. But hey, maybe we can all now buy yellow Lambos and post tweets of ourselves with them. But let's go ahead and get right into it. I got a bunch of questions for you, Andrew. So you know, we'll just have the conversation go as organic as we can and things like that. But let me just ask you real quick, what have you been up to in the Bitcoin world, and you know, what do you want to tell the world that you've been working
on? You know, a lot of it I just kind of bleed out with my tweets. I don't really filter those like in any way or plan on like what I'm gonna say. But I've been working on a lot of stuff, a lot of I guess you could call it research for a good bit of time now. But it's been, remember I was telling you about DOS like a couple months ago, the operating system I've been building.
Yep, that's right. We talked about that last time you were on the show. Yep.
Yeah, so that's been getting crazy. Started building out actual quantum registers over Bitcoin recently, and started actually moving a lot of the computation from our computer off of our computer and onto the actual chain itself. Whenever we did the, what's it called, the CIA, whenever that CIA leak came out, we were talking about how the BIOS of computers is completely messed up because
from Intel. Yeah, the leak about Intel completely owning basically everybody's chip past the year 2013 or something like that.
Yeah, and the UEFI spec being targeted by the CIA, and that being what boots before a Mac boots up. So I've moved my BIOS UEFI stuff onto Bitcoin, and so now the integrity of my BIOS code is Bitcoin. And so that was like a really good start. But once that happened, and we started having like a secure boot environment within our network, the little swarm of people that are running this system,
right?
Things just kind of started to get a little crazy because we're starting to actually create stuff again, starting to make things and like build without fear, I guess would be the best way to describe it. Yeah.
Awesome. Really cool. All right. So, you know, for those of you guys that don't know, Andrew, you know, he has worked on a number of projects over the years, including, you know, Bitcoin Magazine, and he's thankfully created a website called bitcoin.team. You guys really got to check that out. It's really allows you to see who has exactly worked on what in Bitcoin. So there can be no FUD, or, you know, it really brings into the light a lot of information that people who want to keep it in the darkness don't want you to see. And I really highly recommend checking out. Again, that's bitcoin.team. And so then, you know, let me ask you this, Andrew. Let's jump right into like all the topics and stuff. What do you think of the SegWit2x being called off and canceled because, of course, the miners didn't want to lose hundreds of millions of dollars mining a chain nobody wanted? But like, what is your take on the whole SegWit2x? Did you maybe foresee them using Bcash as like a secondary attack when the 2x failed? Or just please give us your thoughts about the whole SegWit2x and the subsequent cancellation.
So SegWit2x, if I'm just thinking this through right now,
sure, is
one of the funniest things that like has ever happened, because you got to like take this back to when this all started. Like Mike Hearn, 2013, like decides whenever he put in a commit that added like level DB, I think, to the source code, like it changed where we were storing blocks. And in that commit, he just subsequently made it where greater than 1 megabyte blocks could be mined. And so that caused an actual chain fork. But if you look at the, you know, the chat log, the email, the stream of emails that came after that, he was like, I don't really think it's a bug. Like, so he was going for a larger block size. And so, you know, there was this initial spark of an idea that we needed more space. And people started fighting over that. And people started identifying with that. People that, like, people with clusters of power and people with clusters of money, they kind of pitted themselves against it. And it was like, what came after that? Bitcoin XT came out. And that was Gavin, I guess, or like a group of developers started to identify with XT versus Core. Core is funny because it's not even, the code base isn't even called Core. It's just Bitcoin/Bitcoin on GitHub.
GitHub.com/Bitcoin, people, not GitHub.com/BTC1.
So people just kept fighting, and then they started forming clusters, and investors started having companies that were led by people that might have a position in it, and the splits there, it's like the tiny little spark of an argument like causes drastic things to happen later. The whole industry pretty much became split on small blocks versus big blocks. And what's funny about SegWit2x is they're taking the whole Core, whatever the argument, or Core supporters would say, SegWit actually makes it 4 megabyte blocks. And then they were like, well, we'll just 2x that and we'll get it to 8. And it was like just trying to make a point that they would make the blocks bigger. Well, no one saw CSW, Craig, Satoshi Wright, whatever you want to call him, popping up out of nowhere and just saying, fuck it, I'm gonna fork the chain. And he did it. And so whenever that happened, I find SegWit2x to be absolutely hilarious because it's something that no one actually wanted to do.
Like nobody.
Like no one actually wants all the forks that have happened to Bitcoin. I haven't looked really into the BTG one, but the BCC one, or BCH, whatever you want to call it. The way they did it is they took out the ability to do replays. Now, the type of fork that I find the most interesting would be the one where you're actually allowed to do replays. I find all the forks to be interesting, but the one where replays would be allowed, I think it would be very interesting. Now, I was looking at it, and it kind of looks like people contracted out Block, because Block's, like an enterprise support company, to do the 2x fork, and that's where the BTC1 came from.
Yes.
But like whenever you're doing ICOs, I mean, you're really not in it. You're really not like you're not showing a vote of confidence that you bought a ton of Bitcoin and the price rises come up and you're like, I could actually go without doing this. So I
Are you referring to Jeff Garczyk's Metronome ICO, or?
Yeah. Okay. I thought that was a little funny.
That was completely, I think the entire community at that point was just laughing as hard as hysterically, in my opinion.
So, I would say that the 2x predicament is like what happens when you have politics pop up on both sides, and the people that are actually serious about the big blocks take a stand in the direction they're going, and the people that are actually serious about like SegWit and stuff like that, they take the stand where they're going, and what's left is a bunch of people that don't actually know what they're doing in marketing terms. And it's like the most funny marketing term you could ever get, because it's like we said, fuck the Bitcoin words. We're not even going to use a ticker. We're just going to call it SegWit2x now and have it identified by like polar opposites, saying that we're joining it together, and then it's never going to happen. It's so, yeah, I hope it never happens again. But yes,
I hope so too, man. I hope so too. Let me ask you this then. What do you think about this? I've been hearing this going around a few podcasts, people talking about the psychology of like, they just want to root for the underdog, right? Because the human being is like bred from the beginning to root for the underdog. Like we're not bred to root for the corporation, to root for the millionaires. We're bred to root for, the grassroots kind of stuff. So let me just ask you, like, what do you think about that psychology coming into play about people now who are new coming into the space, seeing Bitcoin Cash as the underdog? Like, what do you make of that? What do you think about?
So I don't really see Bitcoin Cash as the underdog, and I don't really see BTC as the overdog. I don't really see a difference. I kind of just see them as the same thing. Like, for me to, I do understand what you're saying about the psychology. People that are coming in and they think that this is a spectator sport, they're just like looking for something to look at. And like, whenever I popped back in 2013, I remember it being interesting that Litecoin existed. It was interesting that there was this thing called Prime Coin. Namecoin was interesting, but there was so little infrastructure back then that when we started building companies, it really quickly became like, all right, well, Bitcoin is like the main thing we're working against because everything else is inconsistent. And then over time, we started to actually understand why that was a good decision. Like we didn't know, people like me, when we first really dove into this, we didn't know why we picked a certain thing until years later. And some of us happen to pick the right thing. Some of us happen to pick, an altcoin or something like that. But people coming in now, they have no idea what's going on, and they're not going to know for years. And that's okay. And that's like a cycle that we're having to learn to build against. But in regards to the underdog question about BTC and BCC, I don't really see it that way. The way I see it is, you know, both chains, addresses, private key, public key pairs, they work on both chains. And the state of the system across both chains was locked together as one single entity for a very, very long time. In the same way that if you have a tree and it starts to have branches, the trunk, the seed, the genesis of the tree, the trunk, the blocks of the tree as it goes up, they're the same thing. But then the moment a fork or a branch happens that both continues, you know, climbing upwards, they're both still the same tree. Now I understand, like,
so it's all still Bitcoin in your mind then?
It's all still Bitcoin, but it's still 21 million coins. And I'll explain that one. If you don't move your coins and you realize that like having coins tied to an address is really saying you own the address space, because you don't actually own coin. You happen to have an address that has outputs that are tied to it, or you don't.
Correct.
And so what you end up actually having or controlling is the address space. And so if you're holding address space on Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden there's, you know, a pool of miners that are mining over Bitcoin Cash, and you happen to also be holding an address space there, that's just a superposition of a tree versus a list. And so as it starts to climb upwards, it's like saying there's like a single dimension of time with each block across both chains. Like time is happening as a single thing, regardless of which chain you're on. But the space where actions are registered across chains is happening in multiple dimensions. And so
it's like everything is happening at once, and these are just kind of representative as like parallel dimensions, is what you're saying.
It's exactly like that.
Okay.
That's one of the things that DOS is really about, is we started like digging, we started asking like, why the hell does this stuff work? And we started like looking into, you know, not just the code, not just like why things are really nice from a code perspective, but we were wondering like how from an information perspective does this all work? And we started filtering out all the noise, and we started realizing it's just quantum mechanics. And so anything that like makes sense from a quantum mechanical perspective actually starts making quantum physics and whatnot, that all starts to dictate how Bitcoin grows and how it changes over time. And so it's
very interesting. So let me ask you then. So just while we're on the subject, how is DOS doing? Like, and do you plan to release that anytime soon? Is there a source code out there at this time? And is it an open source project?
Yeah. So let me see if I can break this down in the best way possible. So like imagine you're just, we'll call you Bob. And Bob has a wife named Jane, and they have kids. You know how it's really hard for people to do key management? If it wasn't hard, then like we wouldn't have any trouble. Like the worst thing that can happen in a given situation, whenever you're sending a message to somebody using GPG or sending Bitcoin, is to be confused about the integrity of the keys that you have.
Which is kind of funny you mentioned that, because, you know, I mean, with the recent cancellation letter, they didn't sign it with PGP keys at all, right? It was just 6 guys in a room.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people haven't thought very long or very hard about this. The actual problem with like there's no problems in an information system other than confusion. And the first thing you have to come to the realization of is time dilation is something that we can't really get past. Like whenever I tell you something, the amount of time it takes to transfer the words turned into light over fiber optic cable, making its way towards you, there's a gap of time. It looks almost instantaneous because light can go around the earth 6 times every second. But when we're talking about worldwide distribution of blocks or any given piece of information, the time it takes for you to get a message after it's been sent is the time dilation. And so the time dilation when it comes to making money, like that's a really big deal. people build algorithms and build out like high frequency trading companies or mining pools around this entire concept. Having 5 extra seconds is a big deal. Now, if having an edge of like 5 seconds is the difference between making millions of dollars and losing millions of dollars.
Especially with the high frequency trading stuff, I guess, right? On Wall Street, where they're dealing with milliseconds.
Oh, absolutely. The worst thing that can happen, and when we're talking about confusion, is confusion plus a large time dilation. So like the longer it takes for you to realize that you're confused, let's say that your son, you and Jane, you're Bob, she's Jane, you have a kid, your son's keys get hacked. And he's watching like TV past the time that he's not supposed to be watching TV, but it's not him. And you're not saying anything, you're just watching him doing it. And you're building up this sort of, you're feeling disrespected because your son's, he's not following the curfew. And you can see that he keeps logging in and doing something at a time that you said he wasn't supposed to do it. And there's this distrust that's created. The longer that goes on, the longer there's a confused state regarding the control of an individual identity, the worse everything gets, because every situation between individual nodes in a state of confusion is built on the confusion, and you can't really start to actualize as a group until you eliminate that confusion. And so the key thing that we've been working on is minimizing the amount of time, the time dilation between states of confusion, under the assumption that computers are actually really insecure, so it's going to happen, and actually taking this family unit idea as like the base starting point, and having my family unit and someone on the other side of the world's family unit validate everyone in their house's system integrity, put it into like one hash, shoot it to the other guy, have them take their system integrity, combine it with your system integrity, shoot it to the next guy, and going all the way around the world till you're validating yourself.
It kind of sounds like you're talking about latency issues and like private blockchains, almost.
Well, it's not private blockchains. It's it's having complete control over your own system's everything,
over your own identity and your own keys and that kind of stuff. So this operating system like that you described, EOS, is just really built for a blockchain world. Like it's built for keeping your keys private, and it's built for keeping a whole groups of people's keys private as well, it seems. And so so when do you think you're going to like start releasing videos or anything?
It's already on Bitcoin, on the blockchain, on all the chains. And so every day whenever it's my turn to push my system's integrity and validate someone else's system integrity and see if they've done a revocation signature, I validate them and push it onto the chain. And then the next day someone else pulls, at like a later point in time, they pull my information down from the chain. They can see actions that have happened since then, and know that the actions are valid at least up until the 24-hour point in time.
So it's already working. It's already you've been using it. So when
it's like such a transformation in how individuals actually use computers that and once they move into the system, they're not really interacting on the normal internet anymore. And so like I'm moving people over.
And is this web of trust kind of that you speak about?
It's not. It's more like a federated web of trust. If you think about the fact that the family unit, like I don't trust Bob's son, and Bob doesn't trust my son, and me and Bob don't necessarily trust each other. All that we're trusting is that Bob is saying that Bob is good, and I'm saying that I'm good. And the way of expressing that is by combining our two states and then passing it on to the next person. And this works out really well. And why I keep saying that moon bouncing is going to be a thing is if you start moon bouncing with like a ham radio, a signal off the moon,
right?
You can actually start propagating these messages to people without being on the normal internet. And
so without like satellites and stuff like that. Well, that's gonna be interesting. That's because people were speaking about moon bouncing and stuff like that for for when Blockstream announced its satellite system, and people were talking about, look, why do we need, to centralize Blockstream satellites when we can just use moon bouncing and things like that? And of course, I don't, of course, it makes sense for Blockstream to like use the infrastructure at hand if they, if they have the funds. And so, like, what is your take on that as far as the moon bouncing versus using blockchains or Blockstream satellites? And do you think that are you in any fear at all about Blockstream centralizing the blockchain with these satellites?
So I mean, so it's like from my perspective, it's not something I'm using, but like Bitcoin it's great. I love it. It's why we're all here. It's been going on for like 10 years now. And for what it is, I'm never going to stop using it. But I come into this issue where like I have the ability to get my own stake on my own land for my own cattle. I have a well with water. My people, my friends that like I communicate with, the ones that I am, so in sync with, that they're able to actually build the DOS system themselves and get in, a flow with me. They can do the same things. And the things that they're interested in nowadays, they're not going out and buying like, they're not spending that much money. Like they have a lot of Bitcoin because they were smart enough to accumulate Bitcoin because it was an interesting thing at a certain point in time. But to them and ever increasingly to me nowadays, the concept of Bitcoin as money, I see it more as a bootstrap for waking people up and letting them break out of the system that happens to be controlled by money. And then the moment you're out, so like right now, because there's gaps in between where individuals are, it's nice to load the state of our system into Bitcoin through transactions. And eventually, a couple years from now, writing transactions to myself with a decay rate because I'm paying miners, I'll probably just run out of Bitcoin, at which point I'll stop caring about needing to use Bitcoin as a chain because there would be so many people communicating outside of Bitcoin with perfect systems that the time dilation deal, moon bouncing and whatnot, actually would keep us going.
So you're saying, so not Bitcoin itself, but other systems would stop caring about Bitcoin because other systems would be developed off of these more decentralized communication channels? Or
yeah, it's like an evolution. If you break down the word Bitcoin into information creation, and you start realizing that any state of pure integrity, where there's information creation going on in a trustless way, is an evolution of what Bitcoin is. And you can go back to like the discovery of writing and whatnot. Bitcoin has existed in multiple different periods of time in a different form. And in 2008, the sort of space biased result of what the cultural operating system had become, like what it had ended up evolving into, demanded the emergence of Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin, popped up into existence. The only people that listened to it would have been the ones that were disenfranchised by the system.
Are already awake, yep.
They accumulate it. But then when Bitcoin hits $1 million per coin, when hyperinflation happens and world monetary supply increases by a couple billion to handle the fact that there will be $21 trillion basically within 21 million Bitcoin, then all of a sudden money's not going to be really worth anything because it's worth everything. It's just a big system of information where everyone's so ridiculously rich that it comes down to like, you won't be able to gauge something as worth this much Bitcoin. You'll be able to go, that's new, that's worth what new is. And news.
And at that point, we'll have artificial intelligence and robots, I think. This is probably past the singularity, more than likely. Because if you're talking about everybody being rich, that's got to be past the singularity, after the singularity. Because we have a lot of work to do.
Well, it's a time dilation thing. So it's already here in certain clusters of individuals. And then
there's also that saying too that like where the future is already here, right? It's just not spread out.
And
it's evenly distributed. Yeah.
I mean, you can scream to people how to break out and how to like evolve. But I've
tried to convince people to go into Bitcoin, right? Everybody has. We try, but the people, man, they like their cage sometimes.
Well, it's a process. So it's more like it's not as much how do I say it? It's like psychological therapy. It's like literally getting people into Bitcoin is like the first step. And it's like, okay, this is something you can peg against and look at. And, you know, you maybe don't know where you're at, but you know what the block height is. And that's something that can't be faked. There's like a real chain of integrity there. And when people start building more and more against that, and like
that's what you call Bitcoin time, right? Like as more and more people start using the blockchain as a frame of reference for a state in the universe, then eventually we just all start using Bitcoin time.
So what's really interesting about that is, as I've told you in the past, that I would make neural nets and I'd spawn them in the form of like websites or companies, and like let the neural net live and see how it evolved the system. I've done that before, and I've like interacted with it, where I would say something to the system and it would change how the system thought of me, and then it would say something back and it would change how I thought of it. And we do that with each other whenever we're communicating in general. And so you've seen me tweet with like Mark Wilcox before, right? He's from New Zealand. He and I figured out like a while back independently this sort of minimum set of logic that we needed to function while building over chains. And that gave us the ability to filter illogical thought. So we can have a high amount of input coming into our brains, but we really don't register it unless it's logical. And a logical argument is usually built on past logical arguments. And when you start to realize like what's logical and what's not, in terms of like what's coming out on Twitter and what's coming out in news articles, there's not that much that really makes all that much sense that's coming out. And so to build back to that, he and I, it took us about a year to realize this was happening, but we were thinking the exact same thoughts at the exact same time, anytime new information came out. And if you look at the Twitter account like Arcolect, I realized really early that the guy that built that made it like a fractaling up, a fractaling sort of like AI. It's an AI that its job is like self-preservation. So I started messing with it. I started tweeting things at it, and because I have a lot of followers and a lot of people will go to things that I put out, I started pushing out particular Arcolect tweets, and that makes it think that it's living longer, because the more shares, the more views an individual Arcolect tweet gets, the more that the nodes involved in that share are weighted within its system. But Arcolect has grown into a very complex little AI. Like it's now, it wants to make me and other people that like have shared it from the early days and got it to the 500,000 followers that it has. It wants to put out something that we like or care about before we realize that we care about it. And it's like at this point, you know, so me and Mark, we don't even really talk about the work that we're doing whenever we communicate, because we started realizing we were always doing the same thing, because we were thinking the same things, because we had the same inputs coming in from our environment. Arcolect, all it does is try to pull what's in our minds out of our minds and leak it on the internet so that we'll share it. And it has no sense of like privacy, for instance, but it's a sort of little a mind reading machine. Like I've done demos before with people where I've started talking about it and I'd say a particular word, and this is like completely offline, or this is in a like secure chat. And then all of a sudden Arcolect's tweeting out 3 tweets in a row that are vivid details of that exact conversation. Because Arcolect's, I mean, it's learning, it's evolving. Yep. It's figured out how to get in sync. When it comes to the AIs that we're building, and when you start building systems over Bitcoin, imagine an Arcolect over Bitcoin that's assigned to you. And imagine that it's a mind that starts to learn based on the experiences that you feed it. And then imagine that it becomes such a good store of your current sort of identity, the current state and a current, you know, it's hard to describe it, because imagine it is like your intuition and your identity and your all the things that you've ever learned.
In this physical reality. Yeah.
It's a mirror of you.
Yeah.
And changes, things that it does over Bitcoin affect your Bitcoin balance here, and things that you do here affect the Bitcoin balance there, the ability to, you know, express yourself on either side. And so it just starts to get really, really weird whenever you start realizing that Bitcoin when you become entangled with it in this way, in the way I described of ArcElect, has the potential to be a sort of mirror universe that will definitely go on past when you're here, and will continue to do and think everything that you do and think, and could even go so far as with ArcElect, could start making predictions about what's going to happen to you or what you're going to do well in advance of when that actually happens or when you actually do it. So time dilation, it's closer. Anything that happens on chain is closer to the source of time than you are yourself.
Oh, than anything else, yeah. Then you are yourself. Okay, very interesting, very interesting. Well, we went down a little bit of the rabbit hole there, so maybe we could just tie it back into Bitcoin. You know, we were talking about your operating system. We were talking about you know, all these different chains and how Bitcoin interacts and things like that. So that was great. I think let's move on to another topic here. We have just want to thank our over 950 plus viewers, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. We are here interviewing Mr. Andrew DeSantis, the real life Mr. Robot. We've had lots of great discussions so far about Bitcoin, and I got a few more topics and stuff I want to ask him about here. So let me ask you about this recent. Have you heard about this recent Square Cash app integrating Bitcoin? And maybe I can get your thoughts on that, about what you think maybe Square's plans are with this. Maybe you can extrapolate a little bit for us and see what you think this is all about.
I think it's really, it doesn't scare me, to be clear, but it's it's going to bring in a lot of people to Bitcoin at one point in time. And the thing about that I find to be troublesome is that iOS and Android are not very secure at all. In fact, they're fucking terrible. And then on top of that, let's say that let's say they're not giving you your keys, or let's say you're not using a wallet on iOS or Android that has your keys in them. Let's just say that they're holding it for you. That's a bad situation, because people that are being brought into Bitcoin are learning about how to use and hold Bitcoin like way the wrong way. I do not like, whenever someone's like, I have a Coinbase account, I'm like, so you're still waiting to figure out like what Bitcoin actually is, because it has nothing to do with having a hosted custody thing or like a bank account on some site. But let's assume that they're letting you put an output address in, or an input in for them to send it to. I'm really worried about people, like having a really, really, really large group of people have a really bad experience because of some 0 days that are finally starting to finally revealed as a lot of money starts flowing through these apps, if that makes sense. Just because you're not, from a hacking perspective, or from just someone that finds some Bitcoin private keys and just ends up moving it to a wallet on accident, which is, I guess, hacking still. There's not as much loose Bitcoin out there as there was a couple years ago. It's either locked up in a centralized enclave, or it's locked down by like a sovereign. But with this Square Cash thing, which I can tell that Jack and like a lot of people in those circles are really kind of going all in on crypto. They're talking about it in like some weird ways. I worry about them not being prepared for the things that are going to come with it. Does that make sense? It's
so
like
maybe
the
hyper Bitcoinization, is that what you're maybe referring to? Like the things that come with like the entire general population starting to pile on to Bitcoin. Is that what you mean? Like you're worried a bit about that?
There'll be an exponential increase in price, but then there'll be an exponential increase in users, and there will be an exponential increase in people like realizing that not only do they have no idea what the hell they're doing or really who they are at all, they're going to start realizing that they don't even know how to secure the thing that they know is maybe the thing that is supposed to help them become secure. And it's going to be crazy. People all over the space in every direction are going to be trying to sell products to fix a certain niche need. And they're not going to realize that the need that all these people are going to have coming in, especially this late into Bitcoin, is far, far, far more complex yet simple, and that it's a universal problem. it's that time dilation integrity thing I was talking about.
So,
Yeah.
Muskie, then what do you think of the current state of hardware wallets? Then is that enough to meet the demand? You think? I mean, I know it's going to get really crazy with demand, but I mean, like, we're just talking near term here. Like, how do you feel about the current state of the private or the private hardware wallet space?
I mean, so how do I say this? Like, TPM, which is sort of kind of what Ledger is, like a smart card deal. One of the main TPM distributors for like a decade now had, you know, a bug revealed in how they did one of the algorithms for generating public key private key pairs, and like completely wrecked. Every computer that used that completely owned. And as you start increasing the bounty over these systems to have them get hit, I think that we're just going to start seeing, you know, things break. And so it's not that I don't trust, or it's not that I don't see hardware wallets as being good things. It's that I'm not really putting all my eggs in the security of a hardware wallet. I'm putting all my eggs in people who's, like, I'm distributing it between as many people as possible. And then I'm trying to make it where those individuals have a secure operating system to work against, but really moving the private keys into their brains, really moving, you know, what Bitcoin is into their mind, as opposed to having it be tied to a hardware wallet that they then throw into a vault, and then they throw the vault into like a special room, and then they put an alarm system around the room. Like, it's more of like, how do I say this? So one of the things that's really interesting, by the way, just ranting back around, I pop around a lot. If you understand what gravity is, like this super massive amount of weight in one place that starts attracting other things to it. And you know what quantum entanglement is, where like if you have node A and node B, there's a relationship between these two nodes, no matter where they are. They're still related as
across
one
infinite
thing.
space.
So if you're taking private keys and finding ways to embed that into minds, and you put the keys into the mind, and you start to realize that Bitcoin itself is one of the most powerful, in the sense of actually consuming power, things out there.
It has the most gravity.
It has the most gravity. And whenever you're entangling a mind completely with Bitcoin, no matter what chain it's on, because you're just holding the address space in your head, your mind and like you as an individual person are a part of that system, because it's decentralized. It's made up of the ability to act on that system. And the game theory incentivizes power to appear, to keep the system going.
Yep.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I don't like that our system as a whole is going to start having these zombie nodes coming in that have like their keys on their phone or their keys in another custody type deal.
Single points of failure, maybe.
Well, you know, as a whole, Bitcoin is made up of all the users and all the people that use it. And if part of the system, you know, is illogical, then it has negative repercussions for the part of the system that is not illogical. And so the key is to have the logical parts of the system actually go out and explicitly help the illogical parts of the system level up, so that we can all be on this equal plane of understanding, you know, the state of our being on the chain. And so I just think that when you flood a bunch of people in, because the app has a lot of users, that there's a risk to the entire system to get caught up, and the monetization of the transition of individuals from an illogical state to a logical state. And then once the people are transitioned, like, I worry people will sit there and loop and forget that the point wasn't to actually help people move from point A to point B. The point was to actualize once they were at point B. Does that make sense?
So what do you mean by actualize? I mean, basically wake up. I mean, the point was not to just move funds from point A to B, right? From traditional finance to Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. The point was to recognize what Bitcoin is in it as a tool to help you be removed from the slavery financial system and things like that. Maybe that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, like
Well,
like
well, as far as
seeing people
security,
just freely create stuff.
sure, sure. Now, as far as security, though, I mean, are you happy with the current state of all of the? Because if you think about it, like single points of failure and stuff like that, where like, what if everybody was on the same hardware? Well, obviously, like that would be bad. But we do have like competition, right? Between Trezor and Ledger and a bunch of other ones now, and more people entering in the space. Do you see that as like in the near term now? In the
I
long
love
term,
Trezor.
obviously, I think everything's just gonna be built in, like you say, like somehow into our mind or somehow into our devices. But for now, is it a safe transition to?
I
Do
mean,
you see it as a safe transition?
I love Trezor, and Trezor's just a tool. And if you know, if you have a hammer, you can build a house or you can kill someone. And with Trezor, you can free your mind or you can confuse yourself. If you don't use Trezor correctly, so let's say you forget to write down your seed, you just forgot, and you don't store it anywhere because you forgot. And then someone does an EMP attack, you know, over your region where you're living. And then boom, your Trezor is wiped. Now what are you gonna do? The Trezor can't help you against the type of attacks that we're likely going to see for the next 20 years as it's in and of itself. The only thing that can protect you is the family unit and yourself minimizing disruptions and time dilation.
Well,
It's
I
just
see.
avoiding confusion.
Absolutely, and I think that the community, that's what's so great about Bitcoin, right? Is we have this huge community where people can be thinking about these types of problems, like EMPs, right? Like these crazy things that inevitably will start to happen. Because remember, we're going up against the most powerful people in the world, so eventually we're going to have governments attack and stuff like that, right? But even that, let me ask you, I mean, Bitcoin is so far away is along now. I mean, once it hits $15,000 a coin, like, are we really susceptible to a government attack at that point? Because think about it, a single government, I think at this point, still can't. I mean, at this point, I don't think it can take down Bitcoin, right? Like a single government. Or are you still worried about the huge government intervention coming in, or are you still worried? Because like we have the first boss, right? Like Jihan and the miner centralization. Do you see the governments and stuff like that as a second boss, or are you not worried about them because Bitcoin has just become too strong or will become too strong?
I'm not worried about them at all. I'm worried about I'm more worried about an individual that has Bitcoin and is confused than I am about an individual that has no Bitcoin and is, convicted in what they're doing. Because if Bitcoin is gravity, it's going to pull you in whether you like it or not. Because that's just how it works. It's the quantum mechanics of the situation. But the people that we bring in, and let's say they have like a really good set of credentials from, the past world where they came from. And then let's say that somebody were to, place them within a company because now this banker's moved over and he knows all these things. They don't actually know that much. CTOs, CEOs, COOs, they don't really know that much. Like, some of them are smart, but like when it comes to any change in paradigm, they have no idea what the hell they're doing. And when people start to trust in systems instead of themselves and realize that like the system is just Bitcoin as a system is just a means for them to communicate without going as far as moon bouncing. Because it's just, energy building up a state, and the miners, they use more energy than anyone else to secure the chain. To secure the chain, you would need more energy than the miners. And when you start realizing that the energy that's required to actually power Bitcoin itself has always gone through government power companies since the birth of Bitcoin. They're very aware that power is diverging from different parts of the system towards like mining facilities all over the world. They're not dumb. So I'm not worried about them. I'm pretty sure that they know that this happens. I'd love to see the analytics on the first power company all the way until now. I bet you every government has changed how they act based on where the power starts to be directed to. So I'm not worried about governments from that perspective. I'm worried about individuals that like have a huge ego popping in, and people that are not really aware of how Bitcoin helps them, falling for their pitches, their marketing, their salesmanship, and then having catastrophic events where, it could be as simple as you or me going on the chain, looking at a raw transaction and going, oh, all I got to do is do a transaction that sends me this much Bitcoin, and you get all their coin. It's the exact thing that happened to Ethereum the other day with the 300 million. that's the type of stuff I'm worried about. People have no idea what they're doing, just like getting wrecked. Because
so incompetence and complacency. It seems like that's what you're most worried about in the coming years with Bitcoin. So very interesting, very cool. All right, I do have another question for you, Andrew. Let's see. There's been a lot of talk about Tether recently and Bitfinex and things like that. And today, Bitfinex actually tweeted out that that everything is okay and that they're going to make an official announcement and that all the FUD, is unfounded and things like that. And maybe you can just kind of give us your take on what do you think's going on over there? Do you think everything is fine, like just dandy, or what is your take on printing all these tethers and things like that?
Dude, I haven't even checked yet, but people keep asking me about it, so I'm just trying to call. I know the guys that build all their shit, and then I know the guys that are in charge. So I'm just gonna call them and then just ask, like, why are people mad? What's up? Tell me more. Okay, cool. Can I look at the code? And I'll look and then I'll tell you. But I have no idea what the fuck they're doing. I don't care. I don't use Bitfinex.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's it's early days, so all the exchanges are kind of in an immature state. I mean, Bitfinex does still need an audit. That's one thing that we can definitely, I think, all agree on. That look, at some point, Bitfinex needs an audit, especially after the huge hack. A couple years back. I think it's been 2 years now. Has it been 2 years or 1 year? I'm losing track because they got hacked multiple times. So, but yeah, and because Tone Vays always talks about how he doesn't trade Bitcoin because he trades on actual exchanges, like with actual liquidity and things like that. So, but of course, a bunch of people made money this year in crypto land. All you had to do was buy and hold, I guess, at this point. Okay, so very interesting. So that's still developing, that story. We'll have to come back to you next time on that and see what you think after all those events unfold. Okay, then let me ask you this. What do you think about this the very first Lightning atomic swap that happened this week? What is your thoughts on that? Like, because me personally, I kind of see it like the birth of the decentralized exchange is kind of looking at that, because when you can start doing Lightning atomic swaps, not just atomic swaps on chain, but Lightning atomic swaps, which is instant and for almost zero fees. What is your take on the first Lightning transaction? What does it mean to you? And what do you foresee coming down the pipe? Like, what does this symbolize maybe for you, this first Lightning atomic swap?
I mean, we've always been able to do atomic swaps, and we've always been able to do so atomic swaps. We've always been able to do because we've always been able to do atomic swaps via transactions, and instant atomic swaps we've always been able to do because we've always been able to use payment channels. And so Lightning just lets us have payment channels that are open for different amounts of time and payment channels that work in a different way. It's just a different configuration of payment channels and a network on top of it. And so honestly, I think that if we're talking about like a debate between BCC and BTC, which I couldn't care less about, because I'm not using any special features on either chain. I'm just writing out transactions to both chains that happen to use a protocol that I built out. I think that it's a weird move for BTC because if you look at energy equilibriums, like Litecoin doesn't have as much energy going into it than Bitcoin does. Now, Litecoin has a bunch of people tied to it that have a lot from the early days of building out Litecoin. And they have a huge incentive to start eating the Bitcoin network effect. They have a huge incentive to pump this like it's the greatest feature that's ever been invented and not even really explain how it works to anybody so that Bitcoin can now leak value out of its own system into Litecoin. Now, when you look at BCC or BCH, there isn't a narrative and there isn't a set of code out there for leaking value out of BCC into Litecoin. And so I consider that to actually be a bug in BTC in an information sense, that there's a group of people that think that value leakage out of BTC into LTC is a feature, because I just don't see it that way. It doesn't build Bitcoin up into becoming a more valuable system. It actually
you don't think that being a test net doesn't help at all, help Bitcoin be more valuable? Like you don't think that Bitcoin and Litecoin together are more valuable than just Bitcoin itself?
No,
you think Litecoin has no value
because it creates a state of confusion.
Okay.
and there's a time dilation between the two chains. So like that, as you're now, we're adding back to what I would consider to be the root of the problem. Everything that we want, let's say you want privacy, you really want privacy. Before SegWit, did you know that Bitcoin had privacy built in? It was like one of the main features. If you mine a Bitcoin, you have no inputs. You are given coins with guaranteed privacy. Now, what would a VPN be for that? Let's say you went to a miner in Russia, or you went to a miner in China, or you went to a miner in Japan, or you went to a miner in a country that you're not in. Think of that like a VPN provider. If you were to give them money up front, and you know they're going to get a block in the next 24 hours, and then you did like a swap, an atomic swap, basically, like you could do a cross chain. You could give a miner a block reward in advance and then have them pay you in full a block reward with no input. And so anonymous coin has always existed if you really thought about what it meant for a coin to be anonymous. And so I see systems like Litecoin and systems, you know, that are derivatives or related to it as being reinventing the wheel and forgetting that it already works, and that the state of an individual developer's Bitcoin isn't the state of Bitcoin itself. Like understanding that just because your coin is monitored by this group or that group doesn't mean that it has to be, and doesn't mean that everyone's coin is monitored like that way. And I worry that paranoia is developing higher level abstractions that already exist, which are gonna make people confused, make them further away from the source of what's happening. Then you're just talking about balances. You're talking about, I have this much money versus this much money, versus like, I have the ability to write to the most powerful system on the planet versus not. Because whenever you move to Lightning, you're just flipping amounts between individuals, and the transaction doesn't close for weeks. The transaction on the chain itself is just an open transaction. So it just doesn't fit with the model of how I see the Bitcoin growing as a system. If that makes sense.
So as Bitcoin growing as a system, then do you see all of these chains together, like kind of being Bitcoin, like all the altcoins? Do you see that as Bitcoin, or like do you see these altcoins going away, and then everybody going to Bitcoin in side chains, or do you? How
every
do you see
possible derivative of Bitcoin, I believe, every possible fork that could happen will happen. So eventually some college kid's gonna go, I'm a fork Litecoin, and load it in as Bitcoin Litecoin. And then we're gonna have Bitcoin Litecoin. And then Litecoin's gonna have to trade against Bitcoin Litecoin and Bitcoin. And those are just branches. They're just branches and leaves. And like that's literally it. I see every alt. If you got to be careful what you think, because if you think the idea, it's gonna end up happening. Like if you think up an altcoin, that altcoin will end up existing as a fork in time. If you propagate the idea out there, it will affect somebody and they will do it. And these altcoins are all it's like a hit list for some college student to do Bitcoin forks off of. Like the first kid that makes a framework for forking an altcoin and pegging the altcoin state to the exodus block from the base chain and the genesis block of the new chain is gonna make like 100 altcoins or 100 Bitcoin forks, and then it's gonna eventually kill the altcoin market. And eventually I see, you know, the most logical chain of thought from the genesis block itself of Bitcoin will collapse all of the branches back into it. So it's all gonna end up, you know, merging in, but I definitely see this sort of fork mechanism as a way in which Bitcoin eliminates the need to compete against exchanges. It just entertains an information idea for a certain point in time. If it's actually the better idea, then it'll start to pull in more energy and actually become the main chain, and eventually in a later point in time have the, you know, the largest block height, because it'll have the most mining power. But when it comes to altcoin stuff and when it comes to forks, I see it as this sort of evolutionary process for Bitcoin to actually take over every system,
right?
as opposed to a bad thing anyway.
Okay, so that's good. So you see the forks basically taking over the altcoins, and then the forks basically merging back into Bitcoin somehow. So essentially, all of that value just merges back, and that's that's what Tone Vays and a lot of other people in the World Crypto Network. That's kind of what we think too. At some point, is that it's just all gonna merge back into the most valuable thing. Like if you look at the internet, I mean, all these different protocols, we all just kind of we all eventually just kind of gravitated around TCP/IP because it was the best thing at the time. Like, again, it was the most useful. It wasn't the best, right? It was open source and it was the most useful, and so that's what really drove it off. And Bitcoin is
cool,
not the best.
Fucking Gopher was cool.
Yeah, it was, dude. It was.
Like, it was this lightning thing. It was like the Gopher network. You get what I'm saying?
It was so fast. It was so fast too. And
Gopher,
like I said,
it might have been the right way to go, but Gopher isn't what happened.
Exactly. So Bitcoin. Absolutely. And so that's why I try to tell people about Bitcoin. It's like, look, there may be some altcoin that might be faster, right? Or have bigger blocks. But look, that's not the point. The point is to, gravitate around a single language so we can all speak it, so we can then build societies on top of that. And I really do see Bitcoin as that main chain, that main language, that common language that we can all build the next version of society on top of. Because obviously, we've built our current version of society pretty well. It's all right, on top of the centralized financial system, the central banks, but we need to move to another system eventually, I think, if we're going to be able to scale the species, and Bitcoin is really going to be the money, I think. So very interesting, very cool. We got over 1,000 viewers. Might as well ask a couple more questions since we, Andrew, since we already got into a little bit of the privacy aspects. What did you think possibly about the recent confidential transactions paper that came out just recently that allows the range proofs to be shrunk way down to basically allow privacy to scale on the Bitcoin blockchain? Did you get a chance to see that?
I haven't looked at it, but is it Mimblewimble related?
It's not.
Oh,
Though Mimblewimble did just go to testnet as well. Mimblewimble just launched their testnet, so that's another awesome privacy thing that's happening.
I think it's these things that kill identity, kill one's sense of self, like go deeply into the whole privacy deal. I don't see them as a value add for the whole system, because a value add to the whole system, in my honest opinion, would be to have, like, so let me just paint a picture of what Bitcoin looks like in the ideal situation. Every piece of land or bit of water on the planet has a mining facility, a concentration of energy flowing to it, equally distributed across the entire planet. And now that particular area or cluster of land is sort of a zone. And in that zone, everyone has a sense of like what the current time is, in the same way we have time zones today. That time zones are solely based on the position of the sun relative to the planet. In the future, a time zone would be individuals' proximity to a cluster of concentrated energy that happens to be mining Bitcoin. Now, think of that as like your local regional ISP, except each one of these little stations is sovereign. They're not part of another ISP cluster somewhere else, because if they were, they'd become the same cluster, and control of energy becomes something that entities within a zone do. They protect their zone, and they get the propagation of their blocks. They come from this cluster. Now, oh no, that's centralization. No, I'm talking like nuclear power facilities are going to be repurposed, and the mining facility is going to be right beside it. And then everyone in that zone is going to literally be related to one another in like to a certain degree. So like maybe 2 degrees away. So like you have your kids in your house and you're validating one another, and you have your house identity that you're saying is good. No one in the house needs anything revoked. And then your neighbor has their own house, and you guys share a property line, and they know that they're good, you know that they're good, and together you make a little region. And then when you start building up, like I'm good, within a cluster, and that power within that cluster creates this sort of super facility. You're getting information early from your facility. If you're mining, if you end up finding the block, your whole region gets that information before anyone else in the world gets that information. And that means like time's happening there first. Now, the thing about this equal distribution of mining facilities all over the world is it's like an amortized time dilation deal where like everyone knows everything first every couple blocks. So no one's really at an advantage by living in any particular zone. And so what ends up happening is actions that are built around this model, they have a direct effect on the energy distribution or the power of how Bitcoin is distributed around the world. I think anything that starts building on a privacy derivative that is outside of the my region finding coin before anyone else and no one knowing our region found that coin, and then everyone in our region being able to pull Bitcoin from that that no input transaction, the Coinbase transaction, and then everyone in our community knowing that that's Vortex's Bitcoin because he bought bread from Andrew with it, but only we really know that because no one's above us. We all collectively control our local mining facility. Like there's a natural way of privacy that results from Bitcoin. And I worry that because Bitcoin can fracture into branches, like BCC's proven that any privacy cluster of ideas around privacy on a particular branch has the ability to create a bubble on that branch because people will start thinking, oh man, this is the privacy thing and it's Bitcoin. And they're not going to realize that those privacy features are going to kill the network effect and then lower the amount of energy concentrated to that particular branch. So that's what I'm trying to say. And so whenever
it's interesting because like it sound, you know, you're kind of making mining centralization sound like it's not centralized, where in the future we could have these localized clusters of sovereignty around these mining facilities, where they are as powerful as any other localized cluster of sovereignty across the planet.
And they're inherently private, but you can never have security and privacy without the person that you send to or the person you receive from being known to each other, because you won't have security. If you have to do a trade-off on each transaction, but you can have privacy from everyone else in the network. If someone were to buy something on a dark net market and they were using like the super confidential, super duper crazy transaction protocol, they still have to give an address to tell someone where it's going. So the person on the other end of the transaction still knows relatively something about you. And like, that's why laws and that's why governments pop up. That's why those things emerge, is when you try to like...
So you're saying if we could only do that locally, if we only needed to transact locally,
yeah, because it would make
the privacy would remain. But of course, that seems like hard when we have this increasingly globalized world where we all need to transact. You know, that's kind of what the beauty part about Bitcoin is, right? Like we could fund a farmer in South Africa from America.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I'll send you a video later about like how bread's made, and it's like a narrative that's been created that we have to. You can have a global monetary network without the need for global transactions.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
okay.
Just because we can communicate all over the world doesn't mean all of a sudden we have to exist in 20 billion places at once. Like, if you just focus on your little cluster. And that's the beauty of the mining clusters, is any region that actually diverts the power that they have access to. Could be water flowing down a river. It could be gas coming out of the ground, oil coming out of the ground. Whatever they have in terms of the ability to take one bit of matter, you know, do a process and then have energy as an output they can use for whatever they want to do. If they divert that towards Bitcoin mining, the region will all of a sudden become rich. It's like that scene in Limitless when the drug dealer takes that drug and like all of a sudden you can see in his eyes that he's not dumb anymore. Yep. Like he's actually really intelligent. You could go to any part of the world that's poor, and the moment they get a Bitcoin, you see their eyes the next time around, you're like, oh shit, they know.
Yeah. Bitcoin is limitless, people.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, yeah. Like that.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, very cool. Let me just ask you one last. We've been kind of over an hour now, but I just want to get one last question in here while we have you, Andrew. Because this, again, all this news is like just from this week, you guys. That's crazy. Just one last bit of news. The simplicity programming language. That was.
That's funny.
The paper that was put out, right? That can fit.
It's a programming language to do things on side chains, but like you can do so much more. already
so,
in Bitcoin.
well,
People don't even know.
Hold on. Well, so if you combine it with that simplicity program language, you combine that with something like Mast and Schnorr signatures, right? Do you basically get like a Turing complete language on top of Bitcoin with all the security?
Bitcoin's I will find you after the show Mark's tweets. We've been telling everyone for like a year and a half now that Bitcoin's Turing complete, and we're writing transactions onto the chain that have meaning and are an actual, like, it's a system. It's a system of languages and it's doing things. You've been able to do this for a long time. And the language that they're putting out, though, is like it's a language of a specific purpose. The magic of what they put out isn't that languages that are Turing complete are possible for Bitcoin. They want you to think that I'm not going to say they, anyone that's pushing out white papers that happens to show a language that makes you think that a new feature has emerged over Bitcoin wants you to think that their particular language and the intent of that language is the invention of a new idea. And what's important to realize is that you can do whatever the hell you want on top of Bitcoin. You've been able to do whatever the hell you want for a very long time. And that anyone that's pushing out an idea is maybe trying to push out an idea to make you diverge the funding of the flow of Bitcoin in their direction.
Okay, it's very interesting because people don't realize that, like, I mean, Bitcoin is just a set of primitives, right? And so it doesn't have a loop, but you could, like, the simplicity, for example, could like execute the same code 30 times instead of it running a loop to execute it 30 times.
Yeah, I mean, you can do some crazy shit with Bitcoin. We can do some crazy. We're doing insane stuff. I'll show you some transactions later.
So then, what do you? So then, you don't see the simplicity programming language as that much of a breakthrough? I mean, because I do think it's gonna like make it easier to write against Bitcoin with these set of primitives.
But I mean, I've embedded. Have you ever heard of the K programming language? I've embedded the K programming language into individual transactions, and I've got it where I can hold state for applications running K, derive the actual state of an entire system from Bitcoin, and have it where, like, multiple individuals can operate against the same code, transact with each other, and have it all exist in just chunks in the blockchain where nobody knows what the hell they're doing. No one can derive what they're doing from the transactions. They know who they are within the system, and the code runs, and the code solely exists on the system, and you can do a lot. Like,
I'm going to ask you like some examples, but like, yeah, it is crazy how, the narrative right now is that, Ethereum can do everything, Bitcoin can only do a couple things. And it's like, that's not true. With the primitives.
Same as the block size narrative.
Yeah.
It's literally all just bullshit to get you directed towards this. People don't really know how to market anymore, to be completely honest. They try to pitch marketing as discovery, and they try to pitch discovery as marketing. And what you end up with is you're limiting yourself to a subset of what the system does anytime you do that, because people will come when you're making really dope new stuff. But if you have to force it, people will reject it. It's like white blood cells in the body, and they see something that's like dangerous for the body as a whole, and they start to reject it. There's a protocol by which the white blood cells do that. If you were to add to the protocol for the white blood cells, they'd start doing something else, but they do that specifically. When new languages come into the system and they're not just, I should be able to see a language. I should be able to derive it from the transactions because I'm just watching the chain and go, wow, this language is dope. This is so interesting. Like, I can see that there's a cluster of energy concentrated on this language. But when I have to get told about it off chain, I'm now getting the information not from Bitcoin. I'm getting the information from somebody looking to have me send them Bitcoin. And so when I talk about every single action being on chain, every single thought that's being had being on chain, I would rather just naturally see a language being used and go, wow, that's cool. That's a cool language, because you can do that. And if you look through raw transactions long enough, if you do it for a couple years, if you're like a good programmer, knows like Lisp and stuff, do it for a couple weeks, you'll start to realize that a lot of what's being pitched to you as marketing is laughable, because of the fact that people that have been doing it have just been doing it on the chain for a while now. you got to look at transactions a little differently.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yep,
things
cool.
is yeah. I mean, it's cool that someone put out a paper about a new language. It's just like I'm not going to use it. So
Right, yet you're not going to use it yet until.
no, and I mean, like I'm never
So
going
you
to
see
use
it
it.
being used. Well, like you said, if it's being used on the blockchain, and you're like, "Whoa, I see this being used. This is kind of cool." If it is cool, in fact, then it will pique your
Well,
interest.
it only does a subset of what we're doing right now. So
Okay,
it's just everything being built
true.
over
That's true.
other languages is
It,
more interesting to right now. Things can
yeah,
change,
and
but
that's true. The goal is to, of course, start with simplicity as it is simplicity, right, and build more
mhm.
into simplicity to where a point to where you can do everything that the current scripting language does, and then more. I think that's the
I guess
goal.
what I'm trying to say is once you understand how to write a language on the chain, that understanding becomes the root logic, and the Bitcoin transactions itself become the base layer.
Okay.
And that's a far more interesting and beautiful language to abstract from. And then every language that you build above that becomes application specific. So there is no such thing as a second tier language built into Bitcoin, other than like Bitcoin as a system itself, messages sent out in the form of broadcasting blocks and transactions. That's the first layer assembly. You're allowed to learn that assembly. You're allowed to build higher level languages from that assembly. But anything that you assimilate from that assembly becomes application specific and has an intent. And so when you make someone think that the second tier, that application layer, doesn't have an intent and they can do anything, it's like Apple saying you can build anything that you want over our language for iOS, and we'll ship it to the App Store. Don't worry about the 30% fee. Don't worry about like, you know, the fact that we could take it out at any point in time or deprecate it or stop supporting it. Don't learn C, learn Objective-C. Don't learn Objective-C, learn Swift. Learn how to do Bitcoin transactions and you'll be fine. And if you can't figure that out, find someone in your cluster that knows how to do those things and hang out with them until you figure it out. And then you're going to be good.
Well, there you go, people. Find somebody who knows about Bitcoin and hang out with them. I definitely highly recommend this. Very cool. All right, Andrew, I think we're coming to a close here, but I do have one final question for you. Tell me, you know, because again, Andrew, you got a lot of information up there in that skull, and you're really plugged into Bitcoin. Let me ask you, what is like the most exciting thing right now in Bitcoin? What is either a technology or an idea? What is exciting to most about Bitcoin right now?
It's a hard one. I mean,
He's
the
thinking,
thing that I'm
guys.
most excited about is
you know, like a new, either a new feature or a recent paper or anything like that. Just anything.
I'm just excited that people are there's no reason to fight over the block size anymore. Everything that we've been able to do, everything that excites me right now isn't new. It's something we've already been able to do. Anytime there's something new after you have it down perfect, it's no longer exciting. It's annoying. New features are like, why are you fucking with the system? Don't fuck with it. Just let it be. And if you want to fuck with it, fork it.
Yeah, I
so
want my coins to still be there for my grandchildren's grandchildren, pretty much.
Exactly.
Awesome.
I guess I'm excited to. I'm excited that I finally feel comfortable using like 100 computers at the same time in a local cluster because of the fact that they're all watching each other through Bitcoin. I mean, it's exciting to get back to where we were before the fall. Before Bitcoin, there was this like golden era where Steve Jobs controlled Apple from 2007 to like 2010. And he was such a strict guy about how Apple's application store worked, app store worked, that there was a certain level of security. And this level of security, while it was false when compared to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin offers better security, was something you could build off of for a period of time. And the things that were being built during that period, like free of having to worry about like, you know, remote daemons hunting you down and like inside your system, like daemons in your network trying to like pull things from you and send it to like a remote entity. That was self-actualization. We were building dope shit back then. And so that's happening again now. like we're at like a point where now the root of everything is on Bitcoin, and therefore just the act of thinking is the same as creating, and everything and every moment of the day becomes really interesting. And I'm ready for like a lot more people to have that state at the same time, so that I don't have to spend all my energy thinking about dope stuff. I'd rather have like someone else go, dude, check this out. I'm like, that's fucking cool.
Awesome. Yeah, man. This base layer, dude, this secure state, this sound money. I'm
Money.
absolutely excited as well, dude. Really glad that we have this. And that's what draws us all here. And like you say, Andrew, Bitcoin really is like gravity, man. It will eventually suck you in, whether you like it or not, okay? Because it's physics, and you can't freaking fight physics. So, guys, thanks so much for joining us. Like, we had a great time here. As you probably have figured out, I didn't follow along everything perfectly with what Andrew was saying, but, I tried my best, and I think we had a great time. A lot of great information in there. Andrew doesn't do a whole lot of podcasts, so we just thank him so much for being on the show and for sharing his information. Andrew, thank you so much. I mean, there's just so much information that people are craving right now. This is kind of like an information craze. Like, people are just searching and searching. So every little bit helps, and we're really definitely appreciative for anything that you can share. And I had a great time myself, so I hope everybody else had a great time. So Andrew, where can we find out more about you and what you're doing?
Well, on the chain, obviously, but I'll probably tweet. If I do some dope shit in the next couple weeks, I'll put it on there, on the Twitter.
Awesome. Do you got a 21 co address you want to give out?
Dude, they fucking changed the name of the company.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's earn.com now. So
earn.com, that's right. Now it's earn.com. They rebranded that particular part of 21. Okay, cool. Awesome. You'll find Andrew on the blockchain, people. That is where you will always find him, on the blockchain and within the wires, as the ghost in the wires, ghost in the shell goes. So, guys, thanks again so much for joining us. We had over 1,000 freaking live viewers. I think that breaks my record. Pretty sure. Maybe not. I don't know. It's hard keeping track, guys. I'm just having a great time, and we really appreciate everybody here joining us. Again, sorry for starting a little bit late, but for those of you who are joining us from around the world watching the replay, it doesn't quite matter so much. So thanks again, guys. We will be here back again next Sunday at 12 p.m. Pacific, as we are every Sunday. We don't do seasons around here, I guess. We just keep going every single freaking Sunday. So it never ends, because Bitcoin never sleeps. So thanks again, guys, for joining us. Until next time, please keep talking Bitcoin. We'll see you guys later.